This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and X-Zone TV. 1-800-610-7035, worldwide toll-free. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. Brian David Andersen is my guest this hour. We're talking about, amongst other things, conspiracies, old and new. Now, more than 100,000 U.S. homes were seized by lenders in September, a record number that probably will decline in coming months as major banks halt repossessions and review their foreclosure practices. It's about time. Lenders took over 102,134 properties last month. That was the highest monthly tally since Reality Track actually began tracking the data in 2005, surpassing the August record of 95,364 homes. It seems that foreclosing filings, including default and auction notices, rose 3% from the prior month to 347,420. That means 1 out of every 371 households received a notice. Joining me to try to make sense of what's going on is our good friend Brian David Andersen, the gentleman behind TriVortex. His website is www.trivortex.com. Brian, welcome back. Great talking to you again.
Well, very good. I'm good to be back.
Brian, what's the real story behind the collapse of the housing market?
Well, we say the foreclosure is the problem, but of course also on the other end was when they first started lending. Now, most of the bad loans that they had given back in 2003, starting and now pretty much now purged themselves. What we see now is a lot of people, because of unemployment, they can't make their mortgages. But now I live in a house here in West Palm Beach, it's actually Royal Palm Beach, Florida. And we've been renting the house now for 2 years. The gentleman that was here got transferred to New York, and he bought the house in 2007, I believe it was, and he paid $409,000 for a 4-bedroom home, living room, dining room, nothing really spectacular. It's in a gated community on a pond, but nothing really per se spectacular. And he also has homeowner fees on the top of this. Now, the Palm Beach County, or the counties in Florida, always do an assessment every year on taxes. So they give the value of the home, and then they tax the value based upon that value. And the banks also, they'll follow mostly that value. They'll maybe give a little bit more of a padding. But now when you go up on the tax assessor's office and you type in our address, the value of the home is $169,000.
Wow. That's nearly $300,000 less.
Right, exactly. So what you also had problems is on the lending of this, you had predatory lending. And the adjusters were coming in and doing all sorts of adjustments. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Stand by. You and I have to take a commercial break. Brian David Andersen is our guest. www.tryvortex.com. The housing market, it's in a shambles, people, and we're going to try and make some sense, real sense, because what we do here is based on truth, not on the hype that you may see at other news sources or hear on other news sources. This is the X Zone, coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, old Florida cuisine at its best.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Exonation, Brian David Andersen is our special guest of this hour, www.tryvortex.com. All right, so the house was valued at $450,000.
He purchased. He signed a contract for $409,000. That's what his bill of sale was to buy this house that we live in. It's $409,000,
Mm-hmm.
and now 3 years later, Palm Beach County tax assessor has put the value of the home at $169,000. Now the bank may do a little bit more, maybe $10,000, $20,000 more,
Mm-hmm.
but obviously he is not paid off anywhere near. He's probably still even paying on the interest on the 409, even after 2 or 3 years, and it's probably either a 20, 30-year note that he's done. So now I had a blunt conversation with the owner, and I was saying, well, he's very fortunate. He is in a very high-paying profession, and he can pay
Mm-hmm.
the rent on both places, his New York place and here. And again, he's losing his shirt every month. Our rent comes nowhere near his note, plus the homeowner's fees that he owes, plus the taxes. But he said, no, I don't want to have a bankruptcy on my credit report.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't afford it.
Sure.
And so he is very fortunate. There's a lot of people in his position that are not in that position at all. They either lost their jobs or they got transferred and they have to walk away from something. And so now the problem being is that he bought his house with one bank, out of, I believe it was Pennsylvania. Then they transferred that note to Countrywide. Countrywide then transferred it to Bank of America. So if he stopped making payments and was going to foreclosure, now the major problem being is when they go into court, there's been this transfer of paperwork, and that's where, again, the banks, they had their predatory lending practices, and now they were transferring these big bulks of notes of, didn't matter if it was foreclosed or not, all of these loans got packaged together and sold. And when they were sold, then they went to, like, as I said, Countrywide, and then they went to Bank of America. Now, the real problem with this is as they sold these packaged of loans, and they were a mixture of very toxic loans and also good loans, but they were packaged, is then the persons who bought these loans were retirement funds, your teacher retirement funds, the unions, that type of thing. They sold these toxic loans then to organizations, and they didn't let them know that they were toxic. And so now it was a double whammy. We have now a double thing. We had the predatory lending on one thing. We had also adjusters going in, like this house that we're living in. They jacked it up to $400,000, and it wasn't even near that value. And so, and bankers were turning their heads. And so now they packaged all these loans. And so as I was telling my landlord, even if you walked away now, you probably would have a problem of who, if they tried to foreclose. But I said also what our owner is trying to do is to do a short sale, which a lot of people are trying to do. What they call in a short sale is the bank will go in and they will loan to a new lender, and then basically they'll loan on a much lower price than what that he bought it for, but then he walks away with no bankruptcy on his record. And the problem being is, as I said for him, and he's approaching us now to do the short sale, and I said, wait a minute. I said, if they don't have the right because of the way they're packaged and doing these things from bank to bank, and they can't foreclose, then what right do they have to do a short sale? And he said, oh, he kind of sat there, and this light went on, and said, what I advise to do, and I advise anybody that's in the same type of situation, is to write the bank whoever's doing your loan, the Bank of America. And I said, write and say, please have a third party come in and do an assessment to make sure that you have the proper paperwork and you have the proper ownership, per se, to come in.
Brian, you're starting. Brian, you're starting to break up on us.
Okay, is that better?
Not really. You're still breaking up on us, buddy.
How's that?
Is that better? You're still very, very choppy. What we're going to do, Brian, is we're going to give you a dingle right back, okay? We're going to see if we can get a better line. So, Craig in Master Control, can you please do that for me? And while we're doing that, we're going to, we're just going to remind people that Brian David Andersen is our special guest this hour. And Brian's website is www.trivortex.com. That's www.trivortex.com. Brian, do we have you back?
Yes, is that better?
Oh, much better. There you go. We got a nice clear line here. Must be sunspots or something, yeah.
Do you want to do that segment over again?
No. We're just going to carry it through.
All right.
Okay, so you went to, now what does this mean for you as the person renting? Does this mean you pay more? Does this mean you pay less? Does it mean that you may have to look for another place to live? How does this affect you?
Well, as long as he is making the payments, then everything is okay. And then, as I said, I advised him to write the bank and say, do you have the legal precedence? Do you have the paperwork to come in and prove that there is a short sale? And as I advised him, and then there's a lot of people don't realize they have these rights, is then if the bank ignores them from coming in and having to do this assessment, he now can bring a lawsuit against the bank and say, okay, and the first thing I would do, and advising others to do, is to bring an injunction and saying, okay, who actually has the paperwork? Who have I been actually making my payments to? And then with this injunction, you halt all payments until everything has been sorted out. And it may take anywhere from 6 months. It may even take up to 5 years to sort everything out. In the meantime, he's not making any payments. So, and there's a lot of homeowners that are in that position that can do that. And that's, of course, is going to put more stress on the banking system. But like this poor guy here, I mean, he's put in a $400,000 investment into his house. It's now bottomed out, basically worth $300,000 less, and he doesn't know who owns the paperwork. And for us as renters, well, as long as he makes his payment, and now there's also a rule now, even if he stops to make his payment, that if they do a foreclosure, as long as we make the payments, that they will not remove the people. Now, they did this 2-3 years ago. In fact, it was really sort of strange. We lived in Cape Coral before being in Royal Palm Beach 2 years ago, and we were almost in an identical situation. The person lived in New York, was renting out the house, and I was on a radio program with Greg Szymanski, and there was a big knock at the door while I was doing the interview with him, and they gave this foreclosure notice and for us to abandon the house as I was on the radio show. And so if I get a knock on the door today, I'll let you know, but I don't think we will because he's making his payments. And so is again, what you're looking at here is not only the way that they doing the foreclosures, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what really happened on the fraud. The fraud started off way before that. And what I think that has happened here is that they were always now trying to push these global currencies. We heard about the thing called the Amero. We've talked about this before.
We have, yeah.
And I believe that what they were doing is that this was basically an act of war that was done against the United States. This was totally it was a predator, and it was premeditated of what they wanted to do, and it was basically a way to crash and put, or at least stress on the American economy. Then everybody would have the savior of being the Amero. Okay, if we all come in, then we're all going to do the Amero. Well, by the time now that the Amero got around, and we also had the big highway that was going to go from Mexico all the way to Canada, and that all got leaked out, and people started talking about it. Now the Amero is dead, and so is this, basically for right now, this international highway going from Mexico to Canada. And because there was a lot of awareness, shows like this, we started talking about it. Now what I believe that they've done is that in 2003, they started doing all these predatory types of loans. They already knew they were toxic. They were going to sell them to then legitimate places like retirement funds and to unions and things like that. They knew they were going to be bad, and now we were going to come up at the end there with all this financial crisis. They created the problem. Remember that if you truly want control, you create the problem and you always come in with a solution. If you do not control the problem, you do not have absolute control. So now they've created all this problem. Now I believe that the end run on this was supposed to be maybe a year ago, that they were going to try to bring the Amero in based upon this faked and created crisis. Now there's so much awareness and so much opposition to it, they've now leapfrogged over that, and now you hear all of these things, and they have Gaither, the United States Treasurer, talking about, well, maybe we should go to a global currency. We now hear about, well, we're going to crash the dollar. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And again, with all this financial crisis, and now with the banks that it's in, because this basically could make, I bank with Bank of America, and I'm very concerned because it can go insolvent. I could lose all my money.
Wow.
That I have in the bank. So there's a lot of people that are all, and then basically then is that, well, okay, well, we got the solution now. We're going to come in, and the IMF is going to take over a global currency. And again, all being created. And again, what we say is, who created it? Again, the Federal Reserve, the United States Federal Reserve Bank, which is privately owned, it's always been privately owned since 1913. Before that time, it was the Treasury Department. Had the Treasury Department been involved over the last 20 years as our primary banker, this couldn't have happened because it would have made the United States government instantly insolvent. But because of the way that they do these predatory loans, they also have what's called the fractal banking system, where basically there's no gold, there's no silver, and the value is that if I have one chicken in my bank, but I can put notes out, and I say, okay, I only have one chicken, but you come into my bank and I'll give you a note for 2 chickens, and I'll give you another one for 6 chickens, but I still only have one chicken. So when all those notes come back in, and I only have one chicken, well, that's called the fractal banking system.
All right, stand by, Brian. You and I have to take a commercial break with the news at the bottom of the hour. Brian David Andersen is our guest. www.trivortex.com. We'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Now there we have Carefree Highway by Gordon Lightfoot. Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. 1-800-610-7035 worldwide toll free. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com on MSN Messenger. xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com and our website www.xzoneradiotv.com. Brian David Andersen is our guest, and we're talking about the story behind the story behind the story when it comes to the failure of the U.S. housing market. And Brian is the gentleman behind Trivortex. His website is www.trivortex.com. So where does the problem lie? Who's responsible? Is it the banks? Is it the lending institution? Or is it the U.S. Treasury? Or is it some other entity?
Well, it's also a combination of everything, but the Federal Reserve, at least in the United States, is the point organization. And when you go back and look at their charter, who owns it, and it's an insurance company that actually is owned by the Bank of England. And so it's partially connected in with the Bank of England, but then who heads the Bank of England? The Queen of England does. Mm-hmm. And they say, okay, well, it stops right there. No, it does not. The Queen of England is a Dame of Malta. That's also part of the Knights of Malta. The Knights of Malta have been an organization for 1,000 years associated with the Vatican. When you are a Knight of Malta or a Dame of Malta, you give all of your allegiance to the Vatican Pope. That's it. It supersedes any type of country, any other types of allegiances that you do. Your number one allegiance is to the Vatican Pope. And so if you also look at the Federal Reserve System, you look at Gaither, you look at all of these people, they're also Knights of Malta or their Council on Foreign Relations. That all then goes back in its tentacles. When you do all the tentacles, it all goes back to Vatican and it goes back to Jesuit. So who is responsible? I still say the ultimate responsibility goes back to the Jesuit and especially the Vatican, because the Vatican also created the banking system as we know it of today. It was somewhat of they took over and kind of ripped off a little bit of what the Knights Templar were doing and crushed them, but then took over their type of fractal type of system, which are basically the United States government has been away from a fractal system since 1836. This was Andrew Jackson. Mm-hmm. He then kicked out the bankers. It was called the United States Constitutional Bank. And it was run like the Federal Reserve. And what he did, he campaigned in 1832 and said, I'm going to pull all the money out of the United States Constitutional Bank. And one of the key things was then who was always backing this central bank, and they're always pushing, were the Jesuits. Then you had, he was about ready to pull all this money out of their Jesuit-run type of bank, the United States Constitutional Bank, and a assassin came up, had two guns, and they both misfired. They then traced this man back, And of course, he had Jesuit. He was totally 100% controlled by Jesuit. He had all these connections to the Jesuits. And then you have so much more intrigue that has gone through all of American history about how they've always wanted to push in a central bank. They got their way in 1913. It was in the waning moments of the United States Congress. Most of the congressional members were gone except for persons that, again, had all sorts of ties to the Jesuits. These congressmen that were tied to the Jesuits and to been Catholic, they then pushed through at the very last moment, the Federal Reserve Act, which moved the printing of the money from the Treasury Department to the Federal Reserve, which was a private bank. Then very shortly after that, because of this fractal banking system, this was called the fiat system, the United States then got into World War I, because then we couldn't get into World War I. It was too expensive for us to do this through the Treasury Department. But when you're doing this, just print the money out as it goes and put everybody into debt, then that's when we got into World War I, and we also got into World War II based upon that you could just print up more money. And that's basically where we've been, is that when you need more money, well, you just print up more. But you have inflation. You have all sorts of negative side effects to this. And also, too, is like what the United States Constitutional Bank was doing, is that they were then giving loans, and they were doing interest rates, and they were giving all these political favors, and that was part of the things that Jackson was very much against. We now see the same thing, is that basically the United States government basically borrows money from the Federal Reserve to operate. And that means that gives the tremendous amount of power to the Federal Reserve to dictate what policies go where, what politicians rise in power, which ones do not. So when, as Amstel Rothschild said, he was a very big banker, his family started off in banking with the Vatican. The Rothschild name was originally Bauer, and they went into, became bankers with the Vatican, and he made the statement, I don't care what type of government system you can have, as long as whoever controls the bank and as long as it's me, then I control the country. And he made this statement around the 1850s. And very, very true. So we're now, the housing market and all of this collapse is so much, it's just a tip of the iceberg. And the whole foreclosure type of thing is a whole tip of the iceberg of what's really truly happening, and has been happening for, at least in the United States, for ever since 1913, and before that when Andrew Jackson kicked out the Jesuit-run bank, and now they instituted again the new Jesuit-run bank, was the Federal Reserve. And all those people that run the bank, they're either Knights of Malta, Trilateral Commission, or they're the Council on Foreign Relations. And all of that tentacles all goes back, when you start putting it all back to pieces, all roads lead to Rome. That's a saying, but it's also so very true, especially when you follow the money. When you follow the money, it all goes back to the very corrupt way that's been run for now, since banking has been done, it's been very corrupt. But in the United States, it all goes back to those traces. And when you also look at all these policies of these wild types of, just anti-human, anti-freedom types of legislation that is now coming through the United States Congress, who has been the think tanks to then write up all of these anti-freedom types of legislation? It all goes back to Georgetown University, Jesuit Georgetown University, and Fordham University. Most of those persons that are writing these policies now are graduates or somehow associated with, like Bill Clinton. He's not a graduate, but he spent a lot of time at Georgetown University, at Center of Strategic Studies. The same thing with two persons that are key to all the policies, both one Democrat and the other Republican, and that's Zbigniew Brzezinski and you also had Henry Kissinger. Now, supposedly they're the left and the right, but they're both senior fellows at Jesuit Georgetown University at the Center of Strategic Studies. Now, how do you think they got to be these senior fellows? Did they do it because they made independent policy, or because they followed the policies so dictated by the Jesuits?
I'll say that they followed the policies dictated by the Jesuits.
Yes. So it goes on and on. So the tentacles are there, but again, we now have our corporate type of news media that is just brainwashing, and not even, it's brainwashing, but it's again, remember, a partial truth is no different than a lie. So all these partial truths and then just omissions about what our true history is. And this is, again, the disappointing thing. You turn on the History Channel. Do we see history anymore on the History Channel?
No.
No, we don't.
Nope.
You see truck drivers. You see all this, and even when you try to do the science fiction channel, you don't see science fiction. You see wrestling. It's like everything has been convoluted as far as our education, whether it be through the mass media or the traditional education system. History has been totally now tried to be de-emphasized and also almost removed, that they're basically, we don't look back. People don't realize the true thing about Andrew Jackson. There was a little story about on History Channel, but they left so many omissions about Jackson. There was actually on the International History Channel they had about Jackson last night, but so much was omitted about what he actually did. And so our banking and how we've had presidents absolutely fearful of the Jesuits and what they have done to try to avoid assassination attempts by the Jesuits. We never hear anything about that. So, but if we start to then look at the start of events, and then now people are kind of getting, well, okay, wait a minute now. This event back in the 1840s, 1850s in Canadian, American, and Mexican history, this doesn't make sense. Why? So that's part of the reason being is people are starting to wake up. So that's now why we have ice road truckers, and we have all this other just ridiculous types of information on, quote, the History Channel and other Discovery Channels. We have UFOs and we have things like that, but not truly what and our background, who we are and what we are and where we have come from. And it's the old adage, if you don't know your history, then you're condemned to repeat it. And we've been repeating. So now hopefully programs like this is that we can now truly start to look back and saying, well, what's here, what's there, and if you also want to find out something about the history of the Jesuits, as I always said, I lived in Phuket, Thailand for a while. If you type in Phuket, Phuket, Thailand, and then you come up with all these little travel stories. Then you type in Phuket, Thailand, Jesuits. You come up with a whole other thing, because not only do you that all these new articles have been written over the last 100 years, not only is it about Thailand, but you also get in China, you get in all of these connecting points, and how it's all interrelated to Jesuit infiltration and Jesuit takeover. So again, is the housing market is just this little bitty pimple.
All right, so
what
would happen?
Massive tumor.
What would happen if we tried to take the power away from the Jesuits, and can it be done?
Well, that's been a problem. They've been kicked out of 43 different countries, and basically the last one who really tried to do that and did it in a big way was France, and that was King Louis. He kicked out the Jesuits, and just what happened? They came back with the Jacobites and did the French Revolution. So it's first off, we have awareness. That's the key thing first. And then realizing, like Nancy Pelosi was paid and bought for by San Francisco University. And that's totally Jesuit-dominated San Francisco University. And when we have to realize is that when she became Speaker of the House, she was put on a private plane, she flew to Rome, and she kissed the ring of the Pope. and on a private plane. That was her whole thing, was to go back and confer. And then she came back, and of course then her famous thing on healthcare was, well, why don't you go and pass the bill first, and then you can find out what's in it. And now here she's been on a private plane kissing the ring of the Pope. So coming to an awareness of who, first off, is being paid off, and then as we now elect our officials, then what's the connections? What's their background? Where do they come from? We don't ask that when we see that all of a sudden, to eugenics. His family has been. He was a Harvard dropout, but his family has been totally 100% Jesuit type of dominated, and then we just, oh, wait a minute, oh yeah, he ends up the billionaire of the world, type of thing. And so we have all these interconnections, but also our local politicians, international politicians, what their background is. And then also now of leading types of things where we can now, the Canadian government should take back over its own currency. The United States government should now take back over its own currency.
The Canadian government does take over its own currency through the Bank of Canada.
Yes, but where is the Bank of Canada? Is it again the Federal Reserve? If Canada's doing its own thing, yes, but if it's part of the international banking system, basically when we pull away, then again, if it is individual, it's very odd. But again, its big neighbor to the south that dominates, regretfully, so much finances. It's privately owned.
Well, you know what? The Canadian dollar is getting strong thanks to the lack of management in the United States. So we're starting to sit pretty high here. Stand by. You and I have to take our commercial break. We'll be back on the other side with Brian David Andersen here in the X Zone. Don't go away.
18 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today. www.soulbalancing.world.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Brian David Andersen is my guest. Brian, as I was saying before we went to the commercial break, the Canadian dollar is starting to go up and the American dollar is starting to come down. We're nearly at par. Is this all part of a plan?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, it's all been, again, a manipulation. And as I said, what it's going to do is try to leapfrog and bring us all, instead of doing this Amero type of thing, they're now going to try to use this crisis to have the IMF start printing money and have something in replacement for the dollar. And this whole thing, you say, oh, well, China is going to be real strong. And all. No, they've manipulated this whole thing. They run the whole money markets, and basically what will be interesting then is that all of a sudden the financial problems will all go away as soon as they get their world currency. But then again, that's going to be it's inflation. It's going to be a lot of high taxes, a lot of control, and so the solution to me would be is to identify political candidates right now that where's the true backing coming from, and then promote those candidates that don't have ties like Nancy Pelosi. Look at her background. She was basically, her qualifications were being a housewife before she became a congressman or congressperson, and that's about it. And her husband was big into the Catholic Church and big donations, that type of thing. And again, all of her backing came from the Jesuits of San Francisco University. So looking at taking hard looks at the candidates coming up and who's backing them and what their stands. Are they for transferring our financial responsibility from the Federal Reserve back to the Treasury Department? Then if that does happen, that's not going to be a solution. In fact, if anything, once that happens, there will probably be a real massive depression, and it will probably take us 5 years to get out of it. But on a long-term type of thing, if we have our government taking it back over, taking the printing of money, which is in our United States Constitution, that says that the government should have control over all coinage and all financial services. That's what the Constitution says. Then we go back to our Constitution, having the government control that rather than a private bank. In the long term, again, we'll find ourselves that the United States can't wage war because we're going to go broke if we do that. But this Federal Reserve has been also, and that's where, again, we talk about wars against basically, there was a war that started in 1947 and went, or actually, well, a little bit even earlier than that, the war against the Buddhists in Southeast Asia. And the United States troops and United States materials were used in the war against the Buddhists by the Jesuits. And that's what Vietnam was all about.
All right, Brian, I hate to do this, old buddy, because whenever we get talking, it's always interesting. And but we've run out of time for tonight, Brian. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back in a couple of weeks because I'm sure that there will be more updates not only on the housing crisis, but on other things that we're going to be talking about over the years to come as we get closer to what many are calling the eve of destruction. Brian David Andersen, thanks for joining us, pal.
Appreciate it very much. Take care.
Take care, buddy. Brian David Andersen, he is with Trivortex, www.trivortex.com. My name's Rob McConnell. This is The X Zone. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break at 6.5 minutes past as we continue here in The X Zone from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.